Hello, you are watching Shalom World News. I'm Rory McLennan coming to you from Glasgow, Scotland. Here are the latest headlines from around the world. On Tuesday, former President of the United States Donald Trump slammed Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. This was after Mr. Trump entered not guilty pleas to 34 counts of felony charges, including falsifying business records and alleged hush money payments made before the 2016 presidential election. Mr. Trump told supporters that he never thought anything like this could happen in America. He said the only crime that he has committed is to fearlessly defend the nation from those who are seeking to destroy it. The former president called on Mr. Bragg to step down after leaking details of the indictment to the media before its public release on Tuesday. Mr. Trump gave an address in Florida after his historic arraignment to New York City on Tuesday. He is currently the leading Republican candidate for president in 2024. Hungarian ambassador to the Holy See, Eduard Habsburg, said that Hungarians are eagerly awaiting Pope Francis's April visit. The ambassador added that the Pope's visit to the heart of Europe would fire up the faith of the people. He remarked this is the third time that the Holy Father has brought his closeness to Hungarians in particular. During an interview with Vatican Radio, Hungary's ambassador shared his thoughts on the upcoming papal visit from April the 28th to the 30th. Talking about the deep-rooted faith of Hungarians, Mr. Habsburg said, "Church and state are separate, but they do work together, thereby sharing the significance of the papal visit." The Catholic Church in Nicaragua is under constant attack during this Holy Week by the dictatorship of Daniel Ortega and his wife, Vice President Rosario Murillo. Donaciano Alarcon, a priest from Panama, was expelled from the country on the 3rd of April. Father Alarcon was detained by the police at the parish of Mary Help of Christians in San Jose de Cusmapa in the Diocese of Estel. His crime was asking for Bishop Rolando Alvarez's release during Holy Mass. Bishop Alvarez of Matagalpa was sentenced in February to 26 years and 4 months in prison after being unjustly accused of treason. The Archdiocese of Panama reported that the Claretian priest is well and safe. Meanwhile, Felix Maradiaga, a former presidential candidate in Nicaragua, has launched a worldwide campaign of prayer for the freedom of Bishop Alvarez. A new study warns that under the Darwinian rules of evolution, artificial intelligence could overtake humans and pose catastrophic threats. In his recent study, Natural Selection Benefits AIs Over Humans, author and AI researcher Dan Hendricks says evolution by natural selection could give rise to selfish behaviour in AI as it strives to survive. The research is released at a time when tech professionals and world leaders are raising concerns about how swiftly artificial intelligence is gaining power without sufficient safeguards. He said that in the marketplace, it's survival of the fittest. As AIs become increasingly competent, AIs will automate more and more jobs. According to the study, this is how natural selection favours AIs over humans and leads to everyday people becoming displaced. In the long run, AIs could be thought of as an invasive species. According to police in Nigeria, 8 secondary school students were abducted along with several others by gunmen in northern Kaduna State on Tuesday. This is the most recent in a string of similar kidnappings. Armed gangs operating primarily in isolated regions of northwest Nigeria have attacked communities, schools and motorists and kidnapped hundreds of people for ransom. Samuel Aruwan, the Commissioner for Internal Security in Kaduna State, said that gunmen abducted the students from the A1 Government Secondary School in the Kachia local government area. Insecurity is one of the major problems facing Bola Tinubu, who will be sworn in as Nigeria's next president in May. Nigeria's military has been fighting a long-running Islamic insurgency in the northeast of the country. Under new measures outlined by UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, grooming gangs that prey on children and young women will be targeted. A new grooming gangs task force will see specialist officers support police forces with investigations into cases of child sexual abuse to prosecute more suspects. The team, which will be led by the police and assisted by the National Crime Agency, will be composed of officers with extensive experience in conducting grooming gang investigations. They will offer assistance to organisations working around the nation to root out grooming gangs and put more perpetrators behind bars. The British Prime Minister has also pledged to make sure grooming gang members and their ringleaders receive the toughest possible sentences. In Geneva, President of the World Uyghur Congress Dolkun Isa expressed concern over the state of affairs in the Uyghur Autonomous Region while criticising China for blatantly violating human rights. He said that China is attempting to influence the United Nations Human Rights Council and every UN structure. He pointed out grim human rights violations by Beijing and sought the urgent intervention of the international community. Dolkun Isa declared that the Chinese Communist Party and its leader Xi Jinping represent a great evil, and the situation is dire. He stressed that not only are Chinese Christians and Tibetan Buddhists suffering, but Uyghur Muslims also. He bemoaned that most Muslim nations are silent over the persecution of Uyghurs. Dignitaries representing more than 125 member states took part in the Human Rights Council's 52nd session, which concluded on April the 4th. Patriarch of Baghdad, Cardinal Louis Raphael Sacco, has reiterated that Iraqi Christians must increasingly focus on their mission despite wars, violence, attacks, and increased immigration. As part of his Easter message, he said that the faithful are being constantly tested and they must face life's challenges fearlessly. According to the Cardinal, the existence of Christians in Iraq is not a chance, but rather the result of a divine plan. He said this entails finding and pursuing one's calling with confidence, courage, and zeal. The Chaldean primate stated that despite everyday challenges endangering their continued existence and their future, Iraqi Christians experience light as well as shadow throughout Holy Week. According to research by an independent Australian think tank, the country lags behind much of the rest of the world in protecting religious freedom. The study comes against the backdrop of the long-awaited Australian Law Reform Commission's final review report on proposed religious discrimination laws later this month. When the Commission published a discussion on the proposal that would limit schools' capacity to hire personnel based on their faith, it provoked a protest from Catholic institutions. The study, commissioned by the Centre for Independent Studies, said current religious protections in Australia are ineffective and contestable because they aren't enshrined in law. The US Justice Department has charged 2 more people for carrying out a targeted attack on a pro-life pregnancy centre in the US state of Florida. They were accused of violating the Federal Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. The 2, along with co-conspirators, whom the Department of Justice charged in January, were indicted by a federal grand jury for conspiring to impede employees at institutions providing healthcare from doing so. These arrests were part of the attacks on American pro-life pregnancy centres, following the leak of the Supreme Court draft reporting that Roe v. Wade would be reversed. Hours after Kenyan bishops issued a statement calling for a truce, the opposition leader Raila Amolo Odinga called off protests in the country. The Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops chairman, Archbishop Martin Kivuva Musonde of Mombasa, called for a truce and suspension of all political divisions after violent protests killed 3 people and injured more than 400. Anti-government protests began on March the 20th over the threats of famine, alleged election fraud, and the high cost of living in the East African country, resulting in several businesses being looted and places of worship and cars being set on fire. The bishops decried how politicians have chosen to escalate the protests rather than seeking to bring them to an end. A British Christian Member of Parliament has said that the treatment of gender-distressed students in schools has to be governed by more robust legal and medical guidelines. Miriam Cates, who is the Conservative Member of Parliament for Penistone and Stockbridge, claimed that because of a lack of guidance, schools resemble a Wild West with respect to issues of gender. She said that it is essential to safeguard vulnerable children and that it is significant if schools force students to affirm the gender and pronouns of another child. Citing reports from various sources, Cates said that over the past decade there had been a surge in the number of children wanting to change their gender identity. She further decried how some schools transform children and allow girls to use boys' toilets and vice versa, even without informing parents. And those are your latest headlines. Do join us again tomorrow for more, and do remember, you can always visit swnews.org for more updates. Shalom.